August 11th, 1978 was a cool and cloudy day in Birmingham, England, when Janet Parker started feeling unwell. She had a pounding headache, muscle pain, a high fever, and she started getting a rash. The rash spread from her hands and her feet and her face until it covered her entire body. By August 20th, 9 days later, she was so weak she could barely stand unaided. At 3 p.m. that afternoon, she was admitted to East Birmingham Hospital, and at 10 p.m., she was admitted to Catherine de Barnes Isolation Hospital. Within an hour, her parents and other close contacts were placed into quarantine. The next day, it was confirmed Janet Parker had smallpox. The picture is down. As soon as this was discovered, public health officials sprang into action and embarked on a mass vaccination campaign to immunize everyone who had contact with or was in the area surrounding Janet. By August 28th, 17 days after Janet first had symptoms, over 500 people had been vaccinated. Over the next couple of weeks, she remained in isolation and her condition deteriorated. She went almost blind in both eyes due to the sores. She went into renal failure, and she developed pneumonia. Finally, on September 11th, 1978, 1 month after the first symptoms appeared, Janet Parker became the last person to die of smallpox. So who was Janet Parker, and how did she catch a disease that had recently been all but wiped out from the face of the earth, and a disease that hadn't been seen in Europe since 1953? Janet worked as a medical photographer at the University of Birmingham. Her office was one floor above a lab that performed research on smallpox. Somehow, the virus escaped the lab and got into Janet. It was originally suspected that it got into a poorly maintained ventilation system and traveled up into her office. However, further investigation found that that could not have been the case. In the end, the direct route that brought the virus from the lab into Janet could not be determined. More unfortunately, Janet was not the only person impacted by this smallpox. Her mother also caught smallpox from Janet, but luckily had mild symptoms and recovered. While Janet was in the hospital, her father died of a heart attack that was thought to have been brought on by the stress of his daughter's disease. And lastly, the director of the lab that worked on the smallpox ended up dying by suicide because of how bad he felt and how much he was hounded by the media. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Jeremy. I am the Everyday Epidemiologist. As you can see from the story, today we're going to be discussing smallpox. I wanted to talk about smallpox in the first episode because the story of smallpox is one of the, if not the biggest success stories in the history of public health. Additionally, this disease and story will cover most of the major topics I hope to cover in this series. The other reason why I wanted to cover smallpox first is it is likely a disease most of you have at least heard of, if not are familiar with. And if not, that's fine. And that shows the amazing things that public health can do. But first, I want to get into first, I want to do a couple of quick disclaimers about the channel and about this video. First, I am not a medical doctor. Nothing in this video is medical advice. Any medical advice you want or need should be obtained from your physician. Second, this information is being brought to you by me alone as someone who knows a bit about public health and someone who works in public health. It is not coming in any sort of official capacity from the health department where I work. Third, all of the information provided in this video comes from publicly accessible websites, books, and research articles. The sources will be in the description of the video, and all pictures and figures that were not made by me will have their sources shown on screen. Fourth, I try to provide as accurate and scientifically based information as possible. However, I may misspeak and or say something that is incorrect. If you catch me on this, please let me know. Please leave a comment with what I said wrong, and if possible, a source with the correct information, and I will look into it. If I was wrong, I will definitely get the correct information out there as quickly as possible. Fifth, I will stop for questions periodically throughout the stream. However, feel free to type any questions you may have in the chat at any point, and I will answer them as I see them. If you are watching later, please leave your comments or questions in the comments, and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Lastly, there will be discussions about people getting sick and dying, as well as pictures of people with the disease, which sometimes can be fairly graphic. I will try to let you know before they come on screen, but I may forget, and for that, I'm sorry. So, what is smallpox? Smallpox symptoms tend to go through several stages as the disease progresses and the body reacts. The first is the incubation period. This is the time between when you become infected and when you first show symptoms. This stage lasts anywhere between 7 days and 19 days, with most people showing symptoms between 10 and 14 days after infection. During this time, there are no signs or symptoms that you have smallpox, and you are not contagious, meaning you cannot spread it to another person. The second stage is where the initial symptoms show up. These symptoms include a high fever of about 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, headache, severe back and body aches, malaise, or the general feeling of sickness, feeling like crap, and occasionally abdominal pain and vomiting. Basically the symptoms you have when you have the flu. During the 2 to 4 days of this period, people often feel too sick to perform their normal activities. During this time, the person is contagious, but not as contagious as they'll be later on. The third stage of the disease is the early rash stage. The rash typically starts as red spots on the tongue and the inside of the mouth. These spots turn into sores that will open up and spread massive amounts of virus into the mouth and throat. As these sores break down, a centrifugal rash breaks out on the skin. This means it starts on the extremities, the hands, the feet, and the face. It then spreads up the limbs and eventually to the trunk. During this stage, the person continues to have a fever, but it tends to decline as the rash spreads. Over the next 24 hours or so, the entire body becomes covered in the rash. Over the next 4 days, the rash develops into sores that are filled with a thick, opaque fluid and often have a dent in them. Here is a picture of those lesions, of that rash. This is what smallpox looks like. Once this happens, once these lesions become filled with the fluid, the fever once again begins to rise and usually remains high until scabs form later in the disease progression. This stage, which lasts for about 4 days, is when the person is most contagious. At this point, it's been about a week since the first symptoms appeared. After the next stage, or in the next stage of the disease, the rash forms into pustules. Here is the picture of that, which are raised, round, and firm lesions. They kind of resemble little peas under the skin, all over the body. This stage lasts for about 10 days, and the patient remains contagious throughout it. After about 5 days, the pustules begin to form a crust, and then they scab over. About 10 to 12 days after the pustules form, or almost 3 weeks with the disease, most, if not all, of the sores have scabbed over. I have taken the picture of the disease down. Give me 1 second. My cat needs some attention. All right. Over the next 6 to 7 days after the scabs have formed, these scabs begin to fall off, leaving marks and scars on the skin. While there are still scabs, the person is still contagious. About 4 weeks after the rash appears, and about 4.5 after the first symptoms appeared, all of the scabs have fallen off, the person is recovered, and they are no longer contagious. That is, if the person survived. About 30% of unvaccinated people infected with smallpox ended up dying from the disease. The deaths usually occurred between the 5th and 7th day after the symptoms started, but sometimes happened as late as the 2nd week of the disease, and rarely it can happen later, as we heard in the story about Janet. So, with that, I will take a quick break and ask if there are any questions, and I will check in the comments or in the chat for any questions. So let's see what we've got. Big Fat Snake asks, Doc, I have some hangovers. Can you help me, please? No, I can't. Good luck with that. Snake also asks, wonderful to see the kitties today. Probably not. No Little White Jacket either. Sorry, Daddy K. What causes the disease? Virus? Asks Susan. Yes, we will be getting into that very shortly. That is a good question. Thank you. Mare is asking about how itchy stage 2 is. I'm not sure if it was itchy. I never saw any indications or reports of it being itchy or painful for that matter. So I'm not sure. I nowhere did I see whether it said it was itchy or painful, so I'm not sure if it was. Okay, why smallpox? Is there a large pox like bass fish? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know why they called it smallpox. That's a good question. Let's see if we can find it out. Why and how did smallpox get its name? Let's see. Well, here's one from NCBI, from the NIH. Pox is great and small. The stories behind their names. All right. So, according to this article, the word pox indicated during the 15th century is a disease characterized by eruptive sores. When an outbreak of syphilis began in Europe during that time, it was called by many names, including the French term la grosse variole, the great pox, to distinguish it from smallpox, which was termed la petite variole. Well, there you go. Apparently it was called, well, I don't know why it was called smallpox to begin with, but let's see. Syphilis was the great pox. Let's see. Great pox and smallpox. Let's see. It was also called Posenblattern, or bad pox, or disease of the bad pox. No, that was syphilis again. Let's see. I don't know. This is still talking about. All this is talking about how syphilis got called the great pox, and then it talks about chicken pox and cow pox, and a little bit about monkey pox. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure why smallpox got that name. That's a really good question. Sarah asks, what treatments are there once determined it was smallpox? We will get into that, but for Janet Parker and for people who got smallpox, there was very minimal treatment, basically supportive care, fluids, pain medication, things like that. It really we didn't really have a whole lot at the time. We do have some treatments now, and I will get into that in a little bit. Pox. What does pox mean? Pox basically just it refers to the sores. The pox is the pustules, the pockets are the sores. That's where the pox comes from. Hence why we have chickenpox, smallpox, all these things that give those lesions, give those sores are poxes. Let's see. Any other questions? Abby K asks, or says he has a comment. He had a commenter wishing a pox on his house once, but they weren't specific which one. Well, none of them are really good. Yeah, poxes are a bunch of viral diseases. Some are related, some are not, but it's all the characteristic lesions. That is a pox. All right, thank you for those questions. So I will head on, and if you have any more questions as we go, put them in the chat, and we'll get to it. So, what causes smallpox? How is it spread? And are there any treatments? So this gets to Susan's question and Sarah's question. The disease smallpox is caused by the variola virus. And I have a picture of that. Let me get that up. Nope, wrong one. There we go. The variola virus is a member of the orthopox virus genus. Other viruses in this group include the monkeypox virus that causes mpox, the cowpox virus, the camelpox virus, and the vaccinia virus. We will talk a bit about the vaccinia virus later. The virus that causes chickenpox, interestingly, is not in this genus and is not related to smallpox. It is not a pox virus. There were two different strains of the variola virus, of the smallpox virus. Variola minor typically resulted in more mild symptoms and had a fatality rate of about 1%, meaning 1% of people who showed symptoms died from the disease. Variola major was much more nasty and had a fatality rate ranging from 20% to 50%, depending on the population, with an average of about 30%. The virus was normally spread through two mechanisms. The first was through the air via droplets, and people became infected in their respiratory tract, their mouth, nose, throat, and lungs. Large airborne droplets of an infected person's saliva needed to be inhaled in order to become infected. This required prolonged face-to-face contact. The second method was through skin contact. This method was via the fluid from the lesions and later the scabs. Additionally, this did not require actual skin-to-skin contact. The virus could be spread through items such as clothing, bedding, bandages, and other such items. As such, people who took care of the smallpox patients and cleaned their bedding needed to wear gloves, masks, gowns, and thoroughly wash their hands to prevent becoming infected themselves. Rare transmission occurred through the conjunctiva, or the eyes, or through the placenta. Also, there were reports of it spreading through the air in enclosed places without face-to-face contact, which was originally thought how Janet Parker became infected. How quickly did smallpox spread? Mayor asks, chickenpox is the varicella virus. Yes, it is the varicella virus, which is a herpes virus. Susan, cover your mouth and wash your hands to prevent disease. Yes, absolutely. Two of the biggest ways to spread or to limit the spread of disease: cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze, and wash your hands. Please wash your hands. How quickly did smallpox spread, and how quickly would it spread today if it reemerged? This gets us to a term called the R0, or reproductive rate of a disease. The R0 is the average number of people that will become infected by a single case. These newly infected cases are called secondary cases, as opposed to the first person who was infected, which is a primary case. A disease with an R0 of greater than 1, meaning one person will infect more than one other person, will continue to grow and expand. A disease with an R0 of less than 1 will die out and disappear. The higher the R0, the faster it will spread. Here are some samples of diseases and their R0s. Flu and COVID are typically between 1.5 and 4, with an average of about 2, meaning one person with the flu or with COVID will typically infect about 2 other people. Chickenpox is about 10 to 12, which is really high. And measles, which is one of the most infectious diseases we know about, is between 16 and 18, meaning one person will infect about 16 to 18 other people that are not vaccinated, that are not already immune, which is key. Historical estimates of the smallpox R0 are very difficult to figure out due to the lack of data and just poor quality data. But it ranges anywhere from 1.5 to 20. So as you can tell with that range, obviously very poor data. However, more recent modeling has shown that an R0 of an R0 of 3.5 to 6 is likely more accurate than 1.5 or 20. This means that in a population with very few to no immune people, each sick person will infect an average of 3.5 to 6 other people. This means that not only would it grow and expand, but it would do so very rapidly. Luckily, there are 3 drugs in the laboratory that in laboratories have been shown to stop the growth of the variola virus: tecovirimat, or TPOXX, brincidofovir, or Tembax, and cidofovir. TPOXX and Tembax have been approved by the US FDA for the treatment of smallpox. However, none of these have been tested on an individual who is sick with smallpox, since there hasn't been one since 1978. So it's unknown exactly what benefit it'll have, but it does work in the laboratories. Other than that, treatment includes supportive care, giving them fluids, pain medication, things like that. And at the time when smallpox was circulating in the wild, these supportive care treatments were all that was available. That's it. So now I will pause once again to see if there are any more questions. Mayor, the name of diseases are much different in your language. That's why I asked. That definitely makes sense. That definitely makes sense. And Snake actually puts a comment in the comments in the chat. Descriptive of the rash. The term pox comes from the Middle English word for pustule, blister, eruptive sore. The Latin word variola, the scientific name of smallpox, means spotted, and refers to the characteristic pustules and pockmarks that appear in the skin of infected individuals. Exactly. Sarah asks, can you be a carrier, meaning not show symptoms? You have a couple other questions, so I'll start with that one. No. To the best of my knowledge, and from everything that I've seen, and one thing that really helped with it being able to be eradicated, which we'll get to later, is you cannot be a carrier. If you get the virus, you'll get symptoms, unless your body's able to fight it off before you get symptoms. but you can't be having the virus and spreading the virus without showing symptoms. So even like during the incubation period, before you have symptoms, you are not contagious. So if you do not have symptoms, you are not contagious. And that was a very key thing for the eradication. One of the key traits of a disease that's able to be eradicated is something that there are not carriers for, and that cannot be spread without symptoms. It's a lot harder to eradicate those diseases. Still possible, but a lot harder. Sarah also asks, how did the disease travel? And what caused outbreaks in different locations? So, a little bit of history about smallpox. I don't know too much about this. I didn't spend too much time looking up the history of smallpox, but the first pretty much confirmed or first suspected case of smallpox was Pharaoh. All right, I'm gonna look it up because I can't remember. First case of smallpox. It was Pharaoh Ramses the something or other. Let's see. I think here it is. Ramses the Fifth, about 3,000 years ago. So you can sort. I don't know if you can really see, but his cheek does show the characteristic pustules of smallpox. So it's suspected that he is our oldest known or suspected case of smallpox. But I saw some studies that showed that it's probably been around for the smallpox virus has probably been around for 10,000 years or so, give or take, and has just been all over. It spread with people. It spread through travel. It spread through migrations. It spread all over the place, and it was pretty much everywhere there were people. Pretty much, not everyone, but pretty much everywhere. For some reason, it never made it down to Australia. Australia was never endemic for smallpox, which is interesting. What caused outbreaks in different locations? I mean, smallpox was pretty much always everywhere. So it just, sometimes more people would get it at one point, but it was everywhere that people were. What area of the world was highest hit by smallpox? Well, at least before we had vaccination, where there were people was highest hit. Everywhere. I mean, it was all over the place. We don't have good estimates of how many people historically were infected or died from smallpox. Trust me, I looked. But many people all over the world. The greatest place hit by smallpox was Earth. Ren says, thank you to everyone who has that wicked scar on their arm for the vaccine. Maybe we'll get into it later, but why the weird vaccine delivery method? I don't really get into that, but that is a good question. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about that now. So there were several methods of the vaccine delivery system that were used, but one of the most effective was using something called a bifurcated needle. And I'll pull up a picture of this. So for some reason, this just seemed to be the most effective. What they would do is they would put a little bit of the vaccine on the person's arm and stab them between 5 and 15 times with this needle to inject it into the skin. Why they did that? That's what they found was most effective. I don't know. That's a good question. Mayor, it's said that when Europeans came to North America, it was the disease smallpox that killed most natives, not guns and swords. Yeah, well, it was a number of diseases, but one of the big ones was smallpox. Yes, absolutely. the smallpox laden blankets that were given out, and between that and the influenza and various other diseases, syphilis and a variety of other diseases that the Europeans brought over to the Americas, caused the death of upwards of 95% of North American natives, or American natives, both North and South American. But yeah, smallpox was one of the big ones, absolutely. Daddy K, there was a clip going around comparing news anchors seeming to panic over measles to a Body Bunch, or to a Brady Bunch scene where it was no big deal. Was measles downplayed in the 70s and made more fearful today? And if so, why? Was it downplayed in the 70s? I don't know. Wasn't alive then. But is it made more fearful today? No. It's being accurately portrayed. Measles is a very nasty disease. The mortality rate isn't the highest of the diseases out there, but I don't remember exactly. I think it's like between 1% and 3%. But let's look that up. Let's see, measles fatality rate. Okay, maybe not even that high. But I don't know. I don't remember. So there have been 3 confirmed cases in 2025 in the US, 3 confirmed deaths in 2025 in the US, with over 1,600 US cases. So while the mortality rate isn't the highest, it's not, which is fantastic. Those 3 deaths are preventable deaths. Those 1,648 cases are preventable cases. And even if you don't die from the disease, it is a painful disease. It is a nasty, miserable disease. And it is not being overhyped. I will do an episode on measles soon for this reason, because several years ago, a couple of years ago, there was basically no measles in the US because of vaccines. But now we have almost 1,700 cases. And measles was one of those that is preventable. We could get rid of it if people would get the vaccines. So no, it's not being overhyped. I don't know if it was downplayed in the 70s and being made more fearful today. But as far as being made more fearful today, no. It's that the scientists and public health experts are putting it where it should be. But no, that's a good question, Daddy K, or Abby K, and I will do a measles episode soon, definitely. Let's see, any other questions? Ren asks, is smallpox the one that the New World had no exposure to? Yeah, well, one of the many that the New World had no exposure to. There was no smallpox, among other diseases, in the New World, in the Americas, before Europeans got there. Yeah. Mayor says, just noticed today they don't use those types of needles anymore. Correct. They don't use those needles anymore, but we also, for the most part, and I'll get into this later, but we also, for the most part, do not vaccinate against smallpox anymore. But we do have a couple of new smallpox vaccines that do not require that nasty needle. Absolutely. Yeah, anytime, Abby K. Anytime, no problem. Happy to answer the questions. All right, so I don't see any other questions. So with that, we will go ahead and move on. What public health measures were taken to address smallpox? And could people have slowed or stopped its spread? Preventative measures and control, or preventative control, yeah, I can talk. Preventative and control measures evolved greatly over the past 200 to 300 years. Before there was a vaccine, it was mostly isolate those with the disease and hope you didn't catch it from them. As the virus made it through these measures, it obviously wasn't overly effective. At some point in history, potentially as early as 200 BCE, in Asia, doctors began a technique known as variolation. This is the deliberate infection of an individual with smallpox. This was done by blowing dry smallpox scabs into the nose of a person, which is quite gross, if you ask me. This obviously caused the person to get the disease. However, as opposed to the 30% death rate that occurred in naturally infected people, only about 1 to 2% of people infected this way would die. So, big improvement. By the 1700s, this process spread to Africa, India, the Ottoman Empire, Europe, and later the Americas. Unlike people in Africa and Asia who were inoculated through the nose, as shown in this picture, Europeans and Americans would puncture or cut the skin and rub dry scabs on the wounds, which is also kind of gross. Again, this would cause those individuals to get the disease, but it was frequently more mild and had a much lower mortality rate than those naturally infected. So, preventative measures were limited to isolation measures and variolation. But this is all about to change. In 1768, an English physician named John Fuster made an interesting observation. Milkmaids who had gotten cowpox, which is a fairly mild disease in humans, didn't seem to get smallpox. Over the next few years, at least 5 investigators tested a cowpox inoculation against smallpox, including Peter Blett, Benjamin Jetsey, John Fuster himself, and 3 others that I can only find the last name of, Rendell, Jensen, and Seville. In 1796, so almost 30 years later, an English doctor named Edward Jenner took what he knew about the discovery by Jetsey and what he knew about variolation and suspected that exposure to the cowpox virus could protect against smallpox in a similar way that exposure to smallpox scabs would later protect you against getting smallpox. To test this theory, he took some cowpox scabs from a milkmaid named Sarah Nelms and inoculated it into the arm of an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps, the son of Edward Jenner's gardener. Several months later, Jenner exposed James to the variola virus, the smallpox virus, multiple times. James never got smallpox. And thus, James Phipps became the first confirmed person to be vaccinated against smallpox. So while Jenner wasn't the first to discover the link between cowpox inoculation and smallpox protection, he was the first to publish his data. And that is part of the reason why we know his name more than the others. Throughout the 1800s, vaccination replaced variolation and became the preferred method to protect against smallpox. At some point in the 1800s, the vaccinia virus replaced the cowpox virus in the vaccines, which is where the name vaccine comes from. Vaccine, vaccinia, virus, vaccine. That's where vaccine comes from. Throughout the early 1800s, the smallpox vaccine spread rapidly. Mandatory vaccinations started in Britain and the US in the 1840s and 1850s. One method that was used to help prevent the spread of smallpox was called ring vaccination. This is where close contacts of people and people in the immediate vicinity of a case were vaccinated, as we saw happen with Janet Parker. Since smallpox has such a long incubation period, even getting the vaccine after you were exposed to smallpox could potentially prevent you from getting the disease. Or if you did still get sick, it was more likely to be mild. Due to extensive vaccination efforts, smallpox was eliminated from some regions in Europe and North America by the early 1900s. However, it took about another 50 years for the global fight against smallpox to really kick in. So you may ask, why is there no more smallpox in the world? And that is a great question. Let's get into it. But before we do that, I do want to define a couple of terms, namely incidence, prevalence, morbidity and mortality, control, elimination, eradication, and extinction. I know that sounds like a lot, but we'll get through it as painlessly as possible. Incidence is the number of new cases in a population over a defined period of time. For example, the incidence of measles cases or new measles cases in the US in 2024 was 285. This means all 285 were diagnosed in 2024. Prevalence is the number of people with a disease at a specific time or a time period, and is usually described as a rate. An example of this is in 2021, in the United States, there were 38.4 million people with diabetes. This is not the number of new cases of diabetes, but the total number of people who had it at any point in the year. They could be diagnosed in 2021 or any time prior to that. To describe this as a rate, you would say this is about 15,800 cases per 100,000 adults. Describing it as a rate like this helps us be able to compare different populations of different sizes. Morbidity is simply the presence of a disease. You have a disease. If you're morbid, you have that disease. Mortality is death due to the disease. Control is a reduction of disease incidence, prevalence, morbidity, and mortality to an acceptable level. This level may vary depending on the disease. It may be 0, it may be just a low level. It really depends. Elimination of a disease is where there are 0 incidences, so 0 new cases of a disease in a specific geographic region. That region could be a fairly big region, it could be a fairly small region, it all depends on what you're looking at and what you're talking about. Elimination of infection is where there are no people infected by the virus, bacteria, or whatever causative agent causes the disease in a specific region, whether or not people show symptoms, meaning whether or not they get the actual disease or not. Eradication is where there are 0 worldwide incidences of infection. No one's infected by the infective agent in the world, is eradication. The infective agent may still exist, either in the wild or in laboratories, but it does not get into people. Extinction is where the infective agent no longer exists at all, in nature or in a laboratory. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about how we were able to eradicate smallpox. In 1958, the World Health Assembly, hold on one second. Susan asks, wonder how all these vaccinations for smallpox was funded. The governments funded it. As we'll talk about here, there was eventually lots of global support to eradicate it. So the governments funded it, mostly. I'm sure there was also some private funding as well. I don't really know for sure what proportion came from what, but I believe most of it was governmental funding, worldwide governmental funding. Not sure what Ren's talking about with the rabies there. Yeah, not sure. Not sure if you want to expand on that, Ren. I'm curious. But while I wait on that, let's move on. In 1958, the World Health Assembly called for the eradication of smallpox without the risk of reintroduction, meaning with no risk of it being able to come back at all. To accomplish this, the World Health Organization, or WHO, launched the Smallpox Eradication Program in 1959. By this time, smallpox had already been eliminated in North America in 1952 and Europe in 1953. Unfortunately, this first plan struggled to make much progress due to lack of resources, lack of funding, and a lack of global commitment. Oh, Ren says vaccine after exposure. Yes, you can do that with rabies and a couple other things as well. Mpox, I know, is another one where you can do that. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ren. But why now? Why did the thought of smallpox eradication start in the 1950s? It was mostly due to the advances in vaccine research. By the early 1950s, vaccine advances led to a heat-stable, freeze-dried smallpox vaccine. Well, why is that important? It's because it didn't need to be refrigerated. This means it could be taken out into the most rural areas without worrying about the vaccine losing effectiveness or becoming destroyed by the heat. Additionally, vaccine production had really ramped up globally. Got to the point where in 1967, there were 77 laboratories around the world that were producing the smallpox vaccine. That is a huge number. About 8 years after about 8 years of the eradication program floundering and not making much progress, the intensified smallpox eradication program was launched in 1967. This really kickstarted the eradication campaign. In order to accomplish this massive goal, global health campaigns had to be launched. These included the establishment of a case surveillance system, containment strategies, and mass vaccination campaigns. Hundreds of thousands of local surveillance officers and health workers were recruited to identify people with smallpox as early in the disease progression as possible. These cases were isolated and interviewed to determine how they were exposed and to identify who they may have exposed and other potential contacts. These contacts were notified and monitored. All of the close contacts possible were vaccinated. This is the ring vaccination that I mentioned before. These surveillance and containment strategies with the ring vaccination were most effective in densely populated areas like big cities, where just mass vaccination of everyone was not practical. In other more rural areas, mass vaccination campaigns vaccinated everyone that could be found. Here's a picture of one of those mass vaccination campaigns going out into rural Africa. Through these amazing and extensive efforts, smallpox was eliminated from South America in 1971, Asia in 1975, and the last non-laboratory acquired case of smallpox occurred in Africa in 1977. So, who were the last cases of smallpox? Brahima Banu, a 3-year-old from Bangladesh, was the last person to have naturally acquired variola major, the more severe strain, in the world. She was also the last person in Asia to have smallpox. When she was diagnosed, she was isolated at home with guards posted around the clock until she was no longer contagious. Everyone who lived within 1.5 miles of her home were vaccinated, and everyone within 5 miles was watched to ensure that it didn't spread. Rahima fully recovered. Luckily. The last naturally acquired case of variola minor, the last case in Africa, and the last naturally acquired case of smallpox in the world was Ali Malin. Ali was a hospital cook in Somalia who went out on a vaccination campaign in 1977, in October of 1977. While on this excursion, he rode in a vehicle with 2 smallpox patients on the way to the hospital and caught the virus from them. Unfortunately, Ali had not been vaccinated against smallpox. Again, luckily, Ali would make a full recovery. And as we discussed earlier, the last smallpox death in the world was Janet Parker in England in 1978. Janet and her mother were the last 2 cases of smallpox in the world, even though they had both were vaccinated. In 1980, the WHO declared smallpox officially eradicated. In their statement, they said, quote, "On 8 May 1980, the 155 members of the World Health Organization, represented by their delegates to the 33rd World Health Assembly, unanimously accepted the conclusions of the Global Commission for the Certification of Smallpox Eradication, namely that 1. Smallpox eradication has been achieved throughout the world, and 2. There is no evidence that smallpox will return as an endemic disease." End quote. From that point through today, smallpox only exists in laboratories. It was decided that some virus needed to be kept on hand for research and further development of vaccines and treatments should it become required. There were 4 laboratories assigned to keep these samples, 1 in the US, 1 in England, 1 in Russia, and 1 in South Africa. By 1984, England and South Africa had either destroyed or transferred their samples. This leaves the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and the State Research Center for Virology and Biotechnology, the Vector Institute in Kozlovo, Russia, as the only labs allowed to have smallpox virus. Now, I do want to mention that every now and then a vial of the virus does pop up in some random laboratory after being discovered in the back of a freezer somewhere. But when this happens, it is very quickly destroyed. Mayor. So basically it took less than 10 years to eradicate the disease. Yep. Once we started really going at it, it didn't take long at all. When there is support and global cooperation and funding, good things can happen in public health. And those good things in public health are for the good of everyone. So remember that. Remember that. Why was the eradication of smallpox important? As I mentioned earlier, it's not really known how many people were infected by or died from smallpox in the at least 3,000-year reign of terror it had on Earth. But we have some mortality estimates from the 1900s at least. From 1900 until it was eradicated, smallpox is estimated to have caused 300 million to 500 million deaths globally. And this was after the widespread and common use of the vaccine, and over just 80 years. So getting rid of smallpox has saved countless lives over the past 45 years. Additionally, Due to the eradication of the disease, vaccinations have stopped, and quarantine measures are no longer needed to prevent its spread. This is estimated to save the world's economy more than 1 billion with a B US dollars per year. So, I don't know about you, but I'd say the 300 million with an M dollar cost over the 13 years of the eradication program was totally worth it. I mean, there is a saying, at least in the US, I don't know if it's elsewhere, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is a perfect example of this. And this is why public health needs to be apolitical and supported by everyone in all walks of life, not to mention adequately funded. So, with that, I will stop once more to ask if there are any questions, and I'll check in the comment or in the chat to see if there are any questions that people may have. Susan, thank you for stopping by. Let's see, Mayor, imagine when what we could eradicate if we really wanted to. Absolutely. Absolutely. Imagine what we could do if we could just get the support and funding for getting rid of some of these horrible diseases. Now, there are a couple other diseases that we are very close to eradicating. We have eradicated 2 diseases, actually. Smallpox and a disease called rinderpest, which was a disease in cows. But we've eradicated that as well. So that no longer exists. But we are close to eradication of 2 other diseases, polio and guinea worm disease. We'll talk about both of those at some point. Actually, guinea worm will be next. So, why was the decision to keep some samples made? As I mentioned, it was mostly to have some virus on hand that we could continue research on, and we could develop better treatments and better vaccines against it. Especially early on, it made sense because, while there was only virus technically allowed in 4 labs, as we still see today, it still is in other labs, just unknown. It's an increasingly limited number of labs, but especially at the time in the late 70s and 80s, it could have been in more without really being known it was there. So in the case, or in the situation that it may have gotten out, we wanted to have that on hand so we could have, the best treatments and best vaccines available. There has been some talk recently about, over the past like 5 years or so, about the possibility of destroying the 2 remaining smallpox samples at the CDC and the Vector Institute. That has not happened yet. I don't know much more than that about those discussions. Why it was made to keep it. There's honestly some good reasons to get rid of it and some okay reasons to keep it, but that's beyond my pay grade and beyond my knowledge and experience. So that's a good question. So I don't know. Why aren't there any smallpox animal reservoirs like bats for Ebola? Asks Ren. It's just a human-specific virus. Some viruses only infect one. Some viruses, some bacteria, some parasites only infect one species, one organism, and smallpox is one of them. That's actually another of the main characteristics of an easily eradicatable disease, is one that does not have an animal host, that only infects humans. Again, it makes it easy because we don't have to worry about it being spread from animals to people, so it's easier to eradicate. But yeah, it's just one that's specific to humans. Snake asks, Big Fat Snake asks, I guess that thing like better food, washing your hands, masks, disinfection products and better healthcare have helped with it too. Um, have helped with what? I'm not sure what that it's referring to. Um, but I mean, all those things have helped with um, increasing life expectancy and prolonging quality of life in that life expectancy. Absolutely. And just prevention of disease. Um, so I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. So with that, I guess we will move on to the next section. So, what is the future of smallpox and how worried do we need to be about it coming back? Luckily, due to the use of public health campaigns, including vaccination, containment and isolation efforts, and surveillance programs, as well as massive amounts of international support, even the USA and USSR worked together in the height of the Cold War. It's a big one. The future of smallpox is a happy one. There is no smallpox in the world, and the chances of it coming back are extremely low. It would take extraordinary measures for smallpox to reappear in even a single case, much less as a widespread outbreak. As such, it is not a disease that most people need to worry about, and isn't a disease anyone is likely to ever encounter. However, health professionals and those working in public health are still very mildly concerned about smallpox because of how nasty of a disease it is. This is due to the fact that people, with some exceptions, are not getting vaccinated for smallpox anymore. Between this and the fact that the people who have gotten the vaccine are aging out of the population, there are relatively few people that are immune to smallpox anymore. With the R naught that I talked about before, should smallpox get out, it could spread very rapidly before health interventions are able to be implemented. For that reason, we continue to do tabletop training exercises to prepare for that very unlikely event and to be able to respond as quickly as possible. But in the end, how worried do you need to be about a reemergence of smallpox? If you're a member of the general public, I would say not to worry at all, because healthcare professionals and epidemiologists like me are hard at work to ensure that smallpox stays dead, but not forgotten. And with that, I will once again stop to take any questions that you might have. Are there any questions? Abby K, cooperation during the Cold War? Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were able to set things aside to get rid of this disease because everyone knew how bad it was and how good it would be to get rid of it. They knew that it was a benefit for everyone to work together, even with your mortal enemy, to get rid of these diseases. And for some reason, we seem to have lost that. We seem to have lost the drive to set aside our differences to help protect the health of people. And it's something that we definitely, desperately need to get back. Brandon, can a different strain of smallpox or smallpox virus be developed as a means of possible warfare? Or would the vaccine likely prevent that? Another very good question. So that is likely one of the big, is one of the big reasons why people are talking about destroying the remaining smallpox virus. Because if it's in a laboratory, if it exists at all, terrorists could get in or something could happen and it could potentially be used as a weapon of biological warfare and mass destruction. Could another virus be genetically modified into smallpox or something like smallpox. I mean, I'm not going to rule it out as a complete impossibility. Um, it would be more likely they would, take a virus and just mutate it to make it more infectious and or more deadly. It wouldn't exactly be smallpox. It might be, they might do that with like cowpox or something to make it bad for humans or something. I mean, that could be a possibility. Um, I think it was very unlikely that something like that would happen. And if it's a pox virus like smallpox or cowpox or mpox, a monkeypox virus, or something like that, we do have the vaccines against those that are effective. That should that happen, um, we can use the smallpox vaccines to nip that in the bud. Um, but it also depends on exactly what they do to it. They could develop a way to get around the vaccine potentially. So I mean, it is possible. I think it's incredibly unlikely and not something that I would worry about. I'd be more worried about it just accidentally getting out on the bottom of a shoe. But again, that's not going to happen either because the people who work with smallpox are incredibly well trained and the laboratories are incredibly safe. So even that isn't going to happen. Um, so Brandon, yes, but also no. I don't see that happening. At least not with the smallpox virus. If people wanted to use biological warfare, there are other better viruses and better diseases that they could use. Honestly, this is a bit of a bad question, but could someone weaponize the smallpox virus? Honestly, Mayor, they wouldn't need to weaponize smallpox. Smallpox is already weaponized. It's already spreads very rapidly and is very deadly. So it doesn't really need to be weaponized. But in theory, it could happen, but it is very, very unlikely to happen. But again, even the itty bitty risk of it potentially getting out is one of the main reasons why people are talking about, well, maybe it's time to get rid of it. Maybe it's time to destroy the last samples. And so we don't have to worry about that at all, even. Um, that has not been done yet, but that is definitely in this discussion. Are there any other last minute questions that you might have for me? Anything about smallpox that you might want interested, or anything related to smallpox that you might want answered? Um, I'm here if you have any questions, anything at all. Oh, I'm not. So many? Well, what you got? What you got? Throw them out. Let me know. I'm here to answer. I'm here to answer questions. What's your first question of your many, Brandon? Well, I'm moving on. I'm just wrapping up the stream. So uh, this is your last chance to get questions answered live. Other than that, you'd have to put them in the comments. So go ahead and throw them out there. Any stories about close contacts or potential scares? Um, do you mean about smallpox currently now at BK? Um, any potential scares about smallpox now, or back when there was smallpox active? Sarah, what type of measures are set in place should there ever be an outbreak? Well, as I mentioned, we do annual tabletop training exercises to help make sure that doctors are able to um, identify smallpox quickly, um, and that we're able to respond rapidly in the potential case of a smallpox case. If there's even a suspect potential possibility of a person having smallpox, um, we will treat it like smallpox until we know whether it is or isn't from the laboratory test. So we train on that yearly so that we are still familiar with what we're doing. But in addition to that, at least in the US, and I'm sure in other countries as well, we have both vaccine and treatment in the national stockpile. Um, we have lots of it ready, available, sitting there waiting for its need. Um, got a bunch of the vaccine, a bunch of the treatment, a bunch of the medication, so that if it pops up, we've got it on hand and we can get it out there quick. So those are the main things we've got are the trainings that we do so we know what to do, and we've got the treatment and the vaccine ready to go at a moment's notice. Me personally, during my work, like an electrician working out of a live box. So me personally, no. The closest I've come to a disease, I won't even say closest to coming I've come to having a disease, was in one of my earlier positions. I was working with Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, back in 2022. And I was working at a vaccination point of dispensary where people at risk or potentially exposed to Mpox would come to get vaccinated. Um, and I was working there with them, and there were times when we would have people with symptoms show up. But I, since I was working there and doing that, I got the Mpox vaccine, which is a smallpox vaccine. Um, but so I was wearing my mask and gloves and washing my hands, and was very very careful. So I was never really at risk for catching, never at big risk for catching the disease. So I've never really had any scares personally. Let's see. Captain Crumbs, welcome, welcome. Um, or shall we say Captain Pox? No, I'm healthy as a sneeze. Oh no. I hope you covered your mouth and wash your hands. So any other questions before I wrap up? Any other last minute questions on smallpox or anything related to smallpox? Smallpox vaccine, eradication, anything related to any of those? Any last minute questions? Cat. Does it make sense, Brandon asks, does it make sense for the USA to financially support other countries' public health efforts to keep something extinct like smallpox at bay? Yes. Yes, absolutely. And not just to keep something like smallpox dead, but to help make other diseases dead, or even just work on limiting outbreaks. Diseases don't know borders. Diseases don't care about borders. Something that happens on the opposite side of the world affects us here in the US, or affects, something that happens in Australia affects the US, something that happens in sub-Saharan Africa affects Norway. Because global travel is so easy these days, there basically are no borders. I mean, to use a very different disease, someone could be infected with Ebola in Africa. Before they start showing symptoms, they can fly to China. They could fly to the US. They could fly to Australia. They could fly to Russia before they show symptoms. And then they arrive and they have symptoms and start spreading the disease there. Public health, global health is public health. And it 100% makes sense for wealthier countries, for higher income countries to help with public health globally. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep, Mayor, we got a glimpse of the cat. Why is it called smallpox? Crumbs, we did talk about that earlier. We don't really exactly know. The pox refers to the lesions that are on it, but why exactly it's called smallpox? Couldn't really find an answer to that. Not exactly a smallpox question, but did the cat chew on your hand during the stream? Only a little bit, but mostly he just wanted to sit on my lap or headbutt me. But any other questions? Any other last minute questions? But no, Brandon, that was a fantastic question, and it is one that, especially in the U.S. and potentially in other countries, has been a point of contention and a point of political argument. But in my opinion, public health, health in general, should be apolitical and should be supported by everyone from all political walks of life, from all political ideologies, because public health affects everyone. Public health is for the good of the public, it is for the good of everyone, not just in the US, but globally. And global support for public health is the only thing that helped eradicate smallpox. And we need to continue that. We need to continue that. Do I think that even with the disease being eradicated, it's smart to keep the vaccinations for at least another generation? So, vaccines did continue past eradication or elimination and even eradication a little bit. So at least in the US, there were no more smallpox cases in North America as of 1952. And I think I saw that vaccinations required smallpox vaccinations in the US stopped in 1958. But honestly, no, there's no need. I mean, once there's no need for mass vaccination, for required vaccinations beyond when it was eliminated, when it was eradicated. The people that are at highest risk were and are still vaccinated. People who work in the laboratories where smallpox is are still vaccinated. In the early 2000s, the U.S. military, at least some of the U.S. military, was vaccinated against smallpox, with the fight or war on terrorism really starting up, and the fear that terrorists might get a hold of smallpox. So there was still some vaccination, and the people at highest risk are still vaccinated, mainly being laboratory workers. But beyond that, no, there's no need to continue with smallpox vaccinations. Sarah's casting B-bomb rank 1. Not sure what that is, but okay. Is it ever truly eradicated, though? They find ye old plague in a grave a while back. Well, yes, that smallpox has been eradicated. There has not been a single case of smallpox since 1978. It does not exist in animals. It only exists in humans. So if there are no human cases, there are no cases. The only place smallpox exists is in 2 laboratories. So it is truly 100% eradicated. Plague has not been eradicated. Plague likely will not be eradicated, at least not anytime soon, because it has animal hosts, and or other zoonotic hosts, meaning non-human hosts. But plague does pop up in people every year. Every year in the U.S. there are several plague cases. I don't know about other countries, but at least in the U.S. there are, and it does happen in other countries as well. So plague is not eradicated, but smallpox and rinderpest are eradicated. There are no cases of those diseases globally. So yeah, absolutely. Sarah says her son says that the sailors on her ship caused a small outbreak in Taipan in 2027 to 2028. Not sure what they're talking about, but it wasn't smallpox. Yeah, no idea what disease he was talking about, but it wasn't smallpox. Matt says that someone has plague in his state at least once a year. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it happens. Abby K. Sorry, Matt, my bad. Yes, you're right. I'm not sure if I said that it's caused by the plague is caused by a virus. I may have. Definitely misspoke. It is caused by a bacteria. You are correct, Mayor. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Um, I've just been in a habit of saying virus, talking about smallpox. That yeah, I misspoke. Thank you. Thank you for calling me out on that. As he said, he insists. He's wrong. I don't know what he's talking about, but he's wrong. He did. They did not cause an outbreak of smallpox because there is no smallpox. So he is mistaken. He is thinking of another disease. It could be chickenpox that he's talking about. It could be measles if he's talking about a pox virus. 2007, 2008. That was a little bit before the swine flu, so maybe not talking about that. Could have been monkeypox. That's a possibility as well. Could have been some other pox virus, but it wasn't smallpox. It wasn't smallpox. But we will talk in a future episode about monkeypox, or as it's called now, mpox, because that's a really interesting disease and actually one that I know a bit about. And the outbreak that started in 2022 was a really interesting one. So we will talk about that in a future episode. Matt says, Abby K, stop playing with prairie dogs. And he says, Abby K replies, says, don't tell me how to do my job, Matt. Nice. Will the next cat I get be named Pox? Asks Brandon. Probably not. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. That's an interesting question. That was Thailand, right? What was Thailand? The Mpox outbreak. If you're talking about Mpox, so the Mpox outbreak in 2022 was so Mpox is endemic, meaning it's natural and normal, and it exists commonly in Africa. Um, but the 2022 outbreak was the first case in the 22 outbreak was identified in England. Don't know if that was necessarily the first case, but that's where the first case was identified. But it is spread globally from there. Actually, I'll pull up. Let's see. So here is a map of countries where mpox happened in this 22 through current day outbreak. So the blue countries are countries where mpox had existed before that outbreak, and the orange dots are countries that were new after the 2022 outbreak. So it was in Thailand, and the size of the circle indicates the number of people in that country that were infected. So as you can see, it was and is global. It's still ongoing. It's still happening. There's still cases popping up basically daily. But it's all over the place. So it was in Thailand, but it was first identified in England and spread. I think it was then spread to like France, and then it spread globally from there. Spain has the biggest dot in Europe. Yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Reminds you of Plague Inc. Absolutely, great game, great game. Love that game. Crumbs, it's okay. You don't have any friends. Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Oh, it was a chickenpox outbreak in 2028. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes a lot more sense than smallpox. Absolutely. So yeah. Snake found the information. Bangkok, July 12th. There were 40 cases of mpox. Oh no, yeah, that's in 2025. Yeah, we were talking about an outbreak in 2007 to 2008 snake. But yeah, there was definitely mpox in Thailand, as you can see here. There's can I zoom in? Is it gonna let me zoom in? Maybe not. But as you can see, there were definitely cases of mpox in Thailand, and still are. Yep, no smallpox. There is mpox around. There's actually mpox is interesting. There are a couple of different types of the virus, a couple of different clades of the virus. This outbreak was clade 2, but now there's beginning to get some clade 1 that's had some global transmission as well, which is interesting and a little scary because it's a much nastier version of the virus. But we'll have to wait for more mpox information in the mpox episode, which will come at some point in the future. Crumbs has seen Captain Crumbs has seen the videos of US people trying to point at stuff on the maps. Don't fall for it. Hey, I actually know my geography. And I lived in Cambodia, which is here. So I know Southeast Asia pretty well. Abby K would be curious to hear my possible critique of the movie Outbreak. I do plan on eventually doing some movie critiques. A couple I've got in mind are Outbreak, great movie, and Contagion, terrifying movie, but very, very good movie. So if there are no other further questions, I want to thank you very much for joining me today, or later if you're watching the VOD. If you have any further questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments and I will get to them as soon as I can. The next video will be about dracunculiasis, or guinea worm disease. And I expect that will come out either as a live stream or a video, I'm not sure which, in 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how quickly I can do the research. If you have any other diseases or public health topics you would be interested in me covering, please leave them in the comments as well, and I'll look into them. Stay healthy, stay happy, and remember, public health is for the good of everyone. I'll see you next time.